I'm sure you guys have seen a little bit about the submittal and RFI workflow, and this is just a high level overview of what that looks like. So, and in this case, we're kind of looking at it from a design lead perspective. So you have that contractor that's sending in those items, those submittals, those RFIs, those different items into uh, you. And in this case, we're talking about really what that boils down to is the gatekeeper, right? So the contractor has those items, they're sending them to you for review. You may or may not forward that out to other individuals outside of your organization to get that review process. That's going to be returned to you, where you can log it in New Form of Project Center as a review response. You may need to forward that out to an owner just so that they have the opportunity to see it. They may need to review it, but again, eventually that's going to come back to you. And at the end of the day, you're going to mark it in New Form of Project Center as a respond and close and respond back to that contractor so that they get that finalized version back. So really what this is just depicting is that you, as the user of New Form of Project Center, is acting basically as a gatekeeper. Those are coming to you. You're responsible for forwarding them out if necessary, and then also for getting that information back and logging it in Project Center and sending it back to the contractor. And I want to talk a little bit about a little more detail about that contract management workflow. So what we're looking at here, this diagram depicts kind of what that workflow process is within New Form of Project Center. And really the only difference here, thank you, Mark. The only difference here between this workflow, if you take a look at it, is that in one instance, you are either creating the submittal or RFI, meaning you're the initiator, you're the author of it. So typically those, of course, are coming from the contractor. So that's what that create workflow would be. If you're creating the item, then you're going to go into New Form of Project Center, create that item, and then proceed with that workflow. On the other hand, if you are receiving those items, as we see here, you're going to log that information as a received item in New Form of Project Center. And then you're going to take that workflow step. And the reason it's important here, because what we do in the middle is really kind of basically the same, right? We can forward it for review, whether we're creating it or whether we're receiving it. We can record a review or response, whether we're creating it or whether we're receiving it. But at the end, when we close it, are we either sending it and closing it, right? So if I'm a contractor, I'm going to send it back to the subcontractor and close it out, say here's that submittal, etc. However, if I'm receiving that from somebody else, I need to send them my response and close it out. So that's kind of where that difference is in the workflow, and it makes a little bit of a difference in what that form and the information looks like when we're closing it back. Now, just because we have 4 workflow steps in either one of those workflows, whether we receive it or create it, doesn't mean that we have to follow each and every one of those workflow steps. As we see kind of in the center here, we've got that dashed or dotted line around those 2 workflows that we talk about in the center. So the difference here is I can forward it to a single person for review, or I can forward it to multiple people for review. I can record a single response, or I can record multiple responses, right? So just because we only have that blue box, which represents a step, we only have it there one time, that doesn't mean that that's the only thing that we can do with it. It's pretty flexible in that respect. And in some instances, you may be receiving the item, and then at the end of the day, you don't even have to send it to anybody. You're going to do that whole process. You're going to review it. So you're just going to put in your response and close it out, right? So we don't have to have all of those workflow steps in there, but it helps us with that workflow when we go through that process. And within New Form of Project Center, we can track that workflow regardless of how we're receiving the information. If we're receiving it via email, if we're receiving it via Bluebeam, if we're receiving it, all of that information, we can go ahead and we can track that information and log it as an item in New Form of Project Center.